Welcome everybody to It's Not Tuesday, it is Monday. So holiday Monday, happy Veterans Day. We have a very exciting show for you on this special holiday Monday. And that is, if you've been following my show at all, you'll know that a few weeks ago, a colleague of mine did a react video to one of my videos. Well, then we did a react video back. And that colleague was Dr. Eric Westman. Several of you commented in those videos that we should just get on at the same time and talk out our differences about how we approach helping people to reverse several medical problems through a ketogenic lifestyle. And so we have done that, and we have the famous Dr. Westman here live and in studio. Welcome to Monday night. Nice to see you, sir.
Great to see you. Great to chat. I thought this was going to be an MMA knocked out, drag out.
Yeah, so neither of us have wrestled, but a food fight we could totally do, right? Right. Well,
okay, let's have it.
Let's have it. Honestly, they don't want to hear what we agree on. What was very evident was that most of the followers on my channel or your channel have been around long enough that they know both of our histories and our styles. And it is those differences that I think help us to further educate an audience that is already probably better educated on nutrition than either of us were in medical school. And we continue, hopefully, to take it to the next level for our audiences as well. Well, let me start out with one of the easy places to see our differences. And that was that when you are eating a ketogenic diet, what is the most important, or what is first in that priority list? And you have an answer and I have an answer. So let's start there.
Always protein. Protein comes first.
Why do you say that?
Well, because we're made of protein.
Okay.
We are mainly amino acids and fats and cholesterol. And of course, we're not fruit. When I do a body composition analysis for a patient, I'll point out, you're this much water, you're this much muscle, which is protein, you're this much fat, and there's no fruit. So at least we agree that fruit doesn't come first, which makes us different than every other, doctor and dietitian on earth. Mm-hmm. But the protein comes first because that's what we're made of. If you're left on a deserted island and or shipwreck, something like that, or you watch Naked and Afraid or one of these reality shows, they look for protein, and because that's what we're made of.
Okay.
And now, I'm not saying that fat's bad and that you shouldn't have fat, but if there were one nutrient, one foodstuff to eat, it would be protein. And if it's animal sourced, if you're getting your fatty acids and minerals and vitamins, you're not going to have any malnutrition. So protein comes first.
Well, okay, so I'll push back. When I look at the education gap that most patients come into my space with, the protein has been easily marketed that they aren't afraid of that, and they don't usually skimp on it. When I'm looking at that patient who has the 15 prescription medications and they're rather new to the ketogenic space, the key that I continue to feel like I hound on is, without the fat, we cannot reset this endocrine system that's broken. That inflammatory rate is truly stirring up a storm of muck. And the way you reduce the muck, the way your brain gets to be clear, and then we can start to get into the nuances of, yes, that the protein is important. Fat has to be a major part of that education when they first enter into the ketogenic diet. Yeah. The other section go ahead.
Well, but so that's a different angle. I mean, we may even be in more agreement than other people may think, but so you're not saying people shouldn't eat protein?
No, that's not it at all. Here's a few things that I do get questions.
That's what I heard. That's what my patients heard. They said, she says eat fat, you say eat protein. Really? That's not what we're saying, right?
Yeah, but would you totally agree that when I look at the part that's the most likely for them to stay in a sustained ketogenic journey, like how do I not just have a fad diet, have them come in and do what all the naysayers say, which is, oh, you're just going to lose a bunch of water weight, it's just that first little 3 weeks from now you won't be in that space. And indeed, we've all lost, I don't mean lost patients in life or death, but lost patients saying, didn't work for me, I give up, when they don't feel well. And that satiation, or might we say like comfort to your brain, to me, that's on a wave of fat, that their fat-based hormones have not been circulating very well, or at least they've been suffocated by an excessive amount of insulin. So by pushing that fat in the forefront of at least the first probably 3 to 4 to 5 months of a ketogenic diet, where I can believe you that you're still going to be there asking me questions in 4 months, and then moving on to that. Tell me, I'm sure you've had this question.
Well, so it's interesting because my teaching, which predates the internet keto movement, it predates the ability to measure ketones, breath, blood, urine. My teaching really was keep the carbs super low,
Right.
and your body will be in ketosis automatically, for generally most people. And if you're trying to lose fat weight or you're trying to reverse diabetes, the main thing is to just keep the carbs low and have protein, but the calories still do matter. And so in my patients, and again, this may be a selection bias of patients who we see who gravitate toward us. People tend to go to the doctor that they like and they like to hear and listen to. So I say keep the carbs low, and most people come to me, they burn their own body fat. On that body composition. I had someone this last week who had 200 extra pounds of body fat on her body. She didn't need to eat fat to get it into ketosis. And then my teaching was that you really don't need to add fat. I mean, butter, bacon girl, steak and butter girl, then is out here, pounding the butter. But her story is not one like the journey that my typical patient has of hundreds or 100 pound of weight loss. So you always want to be careful whose experience you're listening to. And I've always liked talking to other doctors because we're treating real people.
Right.
And if what we say that doesn't work, they're going to come back and say, it didn't work for me. And then we find out why. But so I don't know. I don't think you should say fat comes first.
Okay. So here's another place that I've seen the same equation where I push them really into a high fat season, especially for a good several days. When I look at the patient who's 200 pounds overweight and you say, what is the biggest return for getting them into a state of ketosis and keeping them there? Yes, they've got plenty of fat stored, but that fat storage is hidden behind a wall of insulin that, there's a good, that fasting study done in the 70s that would be illegal now up in Minnesota. I'm going to forget the name of the trial, where they fasted people for 45 days. And those with that body weight, that body mass index I think it was over 35, they didn't make a ketone. A significant ketone. They had a trickle of ketones, but really didn't have this wave of ketones, the one where patients say, I feel better for like 10 days. So a ketogenic state or a high protein state, they were fasting. So that, they should have been making ketones in 48 hours if they were healthy. But that advanced insulin resistant patient, when you're looking for when does the ketone show up, when do they feel better? When does the keto flu, pass away? And part of keto flu to me is, they finally have this wave of ketones that is not going to last forever. But that first wave of ketones, they finally feel good. You ever run into this?
Well, sure. And then let's talk about the really difficult patient. They're on 10 medicines, they're on insulin, and the doctor hasn't woken up to the fact that there are GLP-1s and other medicines that can actually have people lose weight. So insulin traps people into gaining more weight. And insulin's already high in type 2 diabetes. It makes no sense to give more insulin to someone if they already have high insulins. Sure. So they're going to take a little stronger, definitely under 20 total grams per day, so stronger prescription level carb restriction. And then it may take longer for them to have progress. And even so I don't really insist on, I want to get you in ketosis. That's the goal. It's getting the blood sugars down, getting people off the medicine safely. And it could be that, if I had all the time and money in the world, I would, what I teach is kind of like minimalist. It's do it so that anyone can do it. I'd love to test your method or other methods that insist on, you got to measure ketones and all that to see if there's incremental benefit beyond what I teach, because there may be actually. And I'd love to hear if someone, was stuck, and then the addition of ketone measurements or drinks or something got them over. But then, you need to randomize people to know if the matter of just waiting, time passing, would have had the same result. That's why experimental studies are so important.
Oh, right. Well, and there's nobody better to talk to about that than you. I actually was saying the pedigree that comes from your teaching and where you've been and the place you've put your energy in medicine. Not only do you have the astute institution of Duke behind your practice and what you've been studying or what you've been researching, but you were in the lineage of the Atkins teachers, right? Like the Atkins. Well, so yeah. Tell that story.
Well, briefly, two of my patients in front of me at the VA hospital, I'm an internist, but I ended up in ambulatory care at the VA in Durham to do advanced training at Duke in clinical trials and statistics. So two of my patients lose over 50 pounds each within, a week. I see them. What did you do? They say, all I did is eat steak and eggs. And they basically were doing the Atkins diet, and I didn't know anything about it. This is 26 years ago now. And, no training and nutrition. Maybe I had some TPN training in the hospital, but no outpatient nutrition. And so I went to the doctors who were using this method right around the year 2000. I met Dr. Atkins, I met Dr. Eads, Dr. Rosedale, Dr. Bernstein, who still is around, by the way, with type 1 diabetes fame. And I just kind of said, how would you approach this to study it as if it was a drug? What would drug development look like? And so we started to do first pilot studies, single arm studies of what happens, and then randomized trials of the low carb keto diet. Again, this is before keto measurements, before internet keto and keto gummies and
all these other
things. Mm-hmm. And just about every study was better than the low fat diet, which was the diet of the day.
Right.
So, Atkins was an influential teacher of mine. When actually it heavily influenced my approach, because I borrowed the information that he had prepared and used over 30 years. So he dies, within 2 years of our first study. So I couldn't learn from him, but I learned from Jackie Eberstein, the nurse who worked with Dr. Atkins for 30 years. And it turns out she was kind of some of the brains behind behind
like
the curtain.
Often, yeah.
So I learned that the method that they had used kind of worked out some of the kinks of the overconsumption of cheese, the overconsumption of cream, of mayonnaise. If you're trying to lose fat weight, you don't want to overconsume fat. So yeah, I am really kind of carrying the tradition of a low carb keto diet before there was the ability to measure ketones even. Well, you could use urine strips
ketones,
back then, and you still can today.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I wonder what, from your perspective of, you might say, well, yeah, that's old stuff, and here's why what I do is, better. But I'm going to say, well, let's put it head to head in a clinical trial,
Well, that's great. So first of all, for those of you watching, I have my assistants trying to gather some of the questions that you want us to answer. I have two more topics I want to make sure we cover. And part of it is what Dr. Westman just brought up here. So if you have questions that you think we should answer, my team will copy and paste them into the document. So we'll be able to answer those. Well, let me tell you that I don't know if you remember this, but you were the first internist to help me. I was looking for a conference anywhere that I could learn.
How could I forget?
So
Come
nice.
on.
Yeah. And I had gone to this place where there were two keto dudes. It was not a, no continued medical education, but I didn't care. I was so hungry for somebody to say, how do you do this? Because it was really helping patients. It really energized me again to say, I can reverse things. What a reward in medicine. And I had always, I'd come from a place of a dynasty of farmers, not a dynasty of doctors. So I didn't have a network that was in the place I was practicing to answer questions like this. Every person I went to ask questions, they looked at me like I had an extra head. And so I kind of started to be quiet. And when I met you, I really was like, oh, and he's from a very renowned institution. It was very validating for me. Between you and Dom D'Agostino, the 2 points in my education where I said, just keep going. You aren't crazy that these patients really are getting better. But as I looked at that, the resources that you learn, again, at the beginning, I just use urine ketone strips. I still encourage patients, you don't need to spend the money on pricking your finger for the first season. When you're doing it right, you're going to make ketones. There's going to be a bunch of them. But as I've walked people through, as you know, my mom had a long story of cancer, and her cancer had a strong autoimmune component to it, which was we didn't know this at the time, but very driven by insulin. And now, 4 years into her journey, was doing great. But during that journey, it really helped me to see on a point by point basis that I needed better data in order to be able to tell her if we were on the right path or not. As soon as things went wrong, they went very wrong in her, which was her gut swelled shut and she ended up with a colostomy bag. And so with one mistake under the belt, I became a very big proponent to say, Mom, you need to be checking your ketone numbers and staying at least above nutritional ketosis. And, the pattern of what I was seeing in patients was as they get the benefits for the first wave of improvement, and then they are out of ketosis, they're not making ketones, yet the diet is the same thing they had been doing. Essentially, their insulin resistance improved. They didn't, to be in a state of ketosis was now going to be a new stimulus, increased metabolic challenge. And as I've walked through something that I think would be really interesting to hear, what would you do with this? I landed in Florida after 50 years of life in South Dakota. And it was during the pandemic where getting a medical practice and having malpractice insurance was not a problem, but getting the electronic medical record at that time to do what it was supposed to do was reliant on the federal government, who was closed due to the pandemic. And so I went 18 months without this specific skill set on my EMR being able to work, and I'm not made of money. So I said, I have wanted to do something in my practice for a long time, and that is teach people in community how to do something at this advanced level. Now, in the past, this had been what would have been actually alcohol recovery. How do you heal a brain? But you're going to have to stay away from booze, and you're going to need a partner in the recovery room, which is called, support groups. So as I approach this, I've now done 5 classes with 200 patients each, and they are all hooked up to that My Mojo dashboard, watching what their blood sugars do every day, what their ketones do every day, morning fasting sugars, morning fasting ketones to be done. And when they come, what brings them into the classroom is that they're stuck. They're not losing weight. And they've been to, I'm eating all protein. I'm eating all, I'm eating butter. You'll hear them saying okay, yes, there's some skill sets that I can help you with by eating butter for a little while, but that's not how you're going to win this game. So when I look at the data, because My Mojo Health has helped to look at what's happening, but I don't know how to, I can use it for myself. And I think I won a poster competition on what happens when you really put them in advanced ketosis, follow their ketones for a 3 weeks consecutive, and what can you see improve? And it is a remarkable transition of brain function, of energy, and I don't care how stuck they are. I haven't had one person. That's really remarkable. 5 classes, 200 students each, not one person that left that classroom with the inability to at least lose some weight, get back on the momentum of losing weight. And so I guess when I look at protein versus fat, when they're stuck, I need your ketones higher in order to get things to move again. It's an endocrine issue. Yes, the calorie, yes, you're going to have to eat, you're going to want to mobilize your own fat. But when your endocrine system is so pathologic that they can't make ketones, they're at 0.3, they're at 0.4, they just don't go up. It's the fat consumption that pushes them.
Well, so really without a experimental design applied to this, and you don't need one. I mean, so experimental work is essential if you're trying to say something's better than placebo, for example, or if you're trying to do a comparison to say, mine's better than yours, and that's what kills me about the vegan scientists. They do it's the best. They've never compared it against other really good diets. It's always like the American diet, So an experiment, and you don't need many people to be in an experiment sometimes. The citrus and scurvy study was done with 12 people. And James Lind had, it was a crossover kind of design and figured out with just 12 people scurvy. I mean, it was that strong and that powerful. So, but here, we're on our 11th cohort of about 500 people who we don't use any ketone measurements. And all we do is keep them to this list of foods that I got from Dr. Atkins, his top secret list that I try to give away to people. So, and a lot of, there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of things change even with or without using a ketone kind of tool. And it would be really cool to kind of, get all of the effective methods that we practitioners and scientists have come up with and kind of get them all on the same racetrack and, just see. And I think what will happen is we'll find some people do better on one approach than another. I mean, what if someone can't get a ketone monitor, right?
Yeah. I have that question a lot. I do. And, it is I think that's one
You just tell them, sorry, see ya.
You can't do it. No, I tell them ketones the ketone strips, ketone P strips they're not nothing. They're not as accurate. Here's some ways that you can screw it up is your bladder's continually filling. So empty it in the morning and then check it a half an hour later. That's going to be the purest that I think we can get it. But I do think that is another approach that you'll hear. I hear folks say, well, Westman says this and I say that. And I think you've already alluded to this, is that I tell them, check your numbers. Look at your numbers. You can't, you're going to see this. I don't need to be the one chaperoning your care. You can chaperone that you are in ketosis or not, and to look at what is your glucose and what are your ketones, and can we move those levers to get you into even a better state of metabolic health. And that isn't the approach that you use. Tell me how.
Well, so, if you can remember back to the Medicare, Medicaid insurance days, I think you were in those days at one point. The clients you get are just all over the place in terms of education and in terms of wherewithal to purchase things. And I decided to stay in the insurance model. Duke has a private practice, and I stayed in there, but it's insurance based. I can't even take cash. Someone came once and said, "I'll pay cash." We don't have a mechanism to do it, so that's kind of strange. But the interesting thing is, one of the patients who I met, who was from the safety net clinic upstairs, learned how to just eat at McDonald's with the information that I gave him. And I don't know the last time I ate at McDonald's. It's not about me, but it's about, and he basically ate 2 or 3 double cheeseburgers, no bun, no fries, no sugar in the drinks. He was only hungry once a day, so he intermittent fasted and only had, or did OMAD, and you could argue that that's not the ideal or optimal way to do it, but gosh, he was so much better off and having figured out within his own, where he eats. And we see people who eat and get groceries, or those who don't ever purchase groceries. And now you have, some grocery stores that don't have anything that's keto friendly because it's all plant-based is best. And, so anyway, I try to just actually, for effect, be sort of the devil's advocate against those who say you have to have grass-fed beef and go to the farmer's market and get a cow, their name up nearby. Anyway,
Betsy, yeah.
So the science, you're right, exactly. The science is get the insulin down and get people off meds safely. Which I guess that leads us to my question for you is, how do we know that being in ketosis is something all day long, something that's going to be necessarily better? And one person said, how do you know there isn't a high ketones, like high glucose, like hyperglycemia? There's a hyperketonemia, a problem there. So I'm not an early adopter in terms of everyone should be in ketosis and you're going to live longer, have all, but I know you need to be very low in the carbs, maybe even at the edge of ketosis. And I heard in a video that you do kind of rely on Tom Seyfried's work. Tom is not an MD, and a lot of his work is done in animals. And there's a big leap to using animal levels, ketone, so now specifically ketosis. I can't tell people, like, the confidence of a FDA approved drug, that if you're in ketosis all day long, you will do better. I mean, that's a study that needs to be done.
Absolutely. Well, one of the questions that somebody wrote in is what value do you place on, Dr. Westman, on the GKI, that glucose ketone index, which is really where Dr. Seyfried has put a ton of his efforts and has.
Unfortunately, sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
Unfortunately, he's talking about cancer. That's his disease model, and if you extrapolate that to others, it's fine. But I treat mainly diabetes, obesity, all the other metabolic things, and cancer, is in there. But the clinical trial. So as a evidence-based clinical trialist with a foot in the academic world at Duke University, I need a pretty high level of evidence to be able to sign off and not have my colleagues say, that Westman guy's really wacko and he's a quack. I mean, there's a textbook now on ketogenic diets, came out last year. I'm sure you have it on the shelf, and I have that as show and tell now. People come in and say, look, here's a textbook, came out last year. The science about diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity is rock solid in terms of using a keto diet. The idea of ketosis and having an incremental benefit beyond that is still relatively unknown. And for cancer, for Alzheimer's, so it seems like, and it's we talk about level of evidence. There's the anecdote, there's a clinical series, there's a cohort study. We say correlation, not causation. That's nutritional epidemiology. Just throw that out.
Yep.
Although when the McMaster group started doing their pure study and finding different results, saying that actually sugar looked bad, it wasn't fat, I'm like, do I reconsider my bashing of nutritional epidemiology? And no, okay, it's still not like an epidemiology, and not like a experimental trial. So until I get 10, 20 signals of people using a product or doing a certain thing, I'm just kind of not sure. So I'm not sure that the GKI has incremental benefit beyond just keeping the carbs low until I'm presented with, or maybe we can do a study. I'm finding that if we don't do it, who will?
Honest to goodness. I think I think you're totally speaking into what pushes me to say, here's why I push that. Here's why I would say measure this. And I do think it is because that when patients present in a state of advanced metabolic dysfunction, Now, you can call that diabetes, you can call that metabolic syndrome, you can call that, a brain that's not working well, an autoimmune disorder. You can even call that cancer, like the links that your body isn't working right, and there is an excessive amount of insulin that's around, known to be linked to these cancers. Does it mean that I can guarantee the cancers are going to go away when you lower the insulin? No.
Right.
But
No,
do I have the power of observation that when that body mass is continuing to decrease, when you have a caloric deficit, I mean, I don't even like to say the word caloric deficit because it confuses people. But when their body mass is continuing to decline to the point where they are taking away metabolic problems, and this isn't going to happen in a 3-week class. This is not going to happen in even a 6-month class. You are go ahead.
part of the I will relent the need for scientific, drug level, FDA approval level of evidence. I'm not like that hard line. If the disease is otherwise unfixable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have cancer, and all you've gone through all of the regular treatments, and nothing's working, and why wouldn't you use a low carb and keto, and then why wouldn't you do the GKI? Because you're against a really bad actor, and I'm humbled because there were some close friends of mine in the keto community who died of cancer.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
So
Sarah Hallberg.
it's not going to be, we all die eventually. I mean, interesting that a lot of the keto folks say, we get 100 years and you take away 8 if you smoked, you take away the, I mean, they have kind of like a calculator for this. I don't think we know to that degree. But the other kind of situation where it's looking like knowing your ketones might be beneficial is the neurodegenerative diseases. So that if you're Alzheimer's in the family, or you're pre the minimum cognitive dysfunction, the early dementias, why not do that? Well, not everyone can do it, but if you have the wherewithal to do it, those two places seem like the science is progressing, and it looks like the more they study it, the better off it looks if you have ketones. But that's not the garden variety person that I see. We're still dealing with a epidemic of obesity and diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease. But so should everyone know their GK? I don't know my GKI. In fact, you could ask me what my ketones are. I don't know what my ketones are. So,
well, I will tell you that usually I start every show showing them I try to do a fast once a week, and in part it is to show people that it is possible to live off of your fat for a 40-hour window every week. And I don't know that everybody needs to do that. It is to show you that this is a long game, that there is why would I do that? Why would I show people that GKI, Dr. Boz ratio, is simply to say when you're looking at the persistent health of your metabolic system, checking to see how well your blood sugar does drop below 100, and I contend you should be in the 80s by the time you've been fasting for 48 hours. And if your body keeps those blood sugars in the triple digits for 2 days without any calories going in, there is a lot more metabolic disease, insulin resistance, happening, even if you don't have the diagnosis of diabetes. When you look at the years patients spend, acquiring the goo, that grime of life that happens, probably for 5 years before they ultimately have a diabetic diagnosis, could we slide them back away from that? Does measuring a GKI reverse that? No, but it gives me a finger, and this is how I teach it. It's a finger on your pulse. How are you doing when you stress your body? Do I stay in ketosis at all times? I don't think anybody does. I mean, in my patients who are under chemotherapy, go into a hyperbaric oxygen chamber 3 times a week, I mean, they are fighting for the last leg of their life. That is a different equation. For the most part.
Yeah, so the context matters
Okay.
for a lot of what we're saying. And I know that people take things out of context and want everyone to agree about everything.
That's a food fight.
Sometimes we're talking about diabetes. Sometimes we're talking about cancer, the different sort of severity of diseases. But it could be that the commonality is being in ketosis. I haven't. Two of the people, there's science and then there's the human aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
Two of the people who I've worked with and wrote a book with, actually, Jeff Volek at Ohio State and Steve Finney, emeritus professor out of UC Davis, are now principals at Virta Health, which is, helping people reverse diabetes. And I want to be like Steve when I get to his age. He's like 15 years old, I think 10, 15 years old, a little older, and he's in great shape. He cycles, and he knows he's in ketosis. I mean, he was in ketosis probably when I was in high school, but I am still, again, I just want a little more evidence, but I don't see any harm in being in ketosis. Have you seen that? I mean, so Jeff Volek at Ohio State, I ask him every time I see him at a public meeting, have you learned anything that's bad about being in ketosis? And he says, no, there's actually never been any evidence that it's bad. And I look back, that's true. With all of the hoopla and the prejudices about show me a clinical trial where the good measurements that showed anything bad about nutritional ketosis.
Right.
That's
you've touched
as
on
an internist.
Yes.
I mean, don't you feel like that's sacrilege almost? It's like,
and the power of that, the same thing that we would be doing if you were managing somebody's blood pressure. They come in, I mean, you start out as a resident saying, okay, you're going to be seeing a doctor from now till you hit the grave because this blood pressure is never going away. And then 20 years into your practice, you see patients who have lost the weight. They are off the prescription medications. Every time I check their blood pressure, it really is normal. And they didn't get there by hiding away from ketones. They really had to persistently push that metabolic motor, if you would, enough to keep chipping away at a problem that we do know there's a tipping point with blood pressure, that it probably will never be normal once it's been high that long. But if you can help them back away from the edge in a place, I think when that timer is an unknown measurement in every person that you're seeing, I push them to prove that you're working your mitochondria out with a state of ketosis. Here's another question. We've got a few of them. I'm going to push a button here. I don't know if it's going to work. Yeah, that button is only going to show me. So we're going to go back to the two of us. I'm going to read this question because there's about 7 of them here. There's several of them, but 7 of them that my team said are worthy of hearing your answers. How does insulin impact an autoimmune disease? So if I was looking at why would I want you to look at your ketones and glucose, is your insulin goes up, your ketones go down. So I think this is a reverse. How do you advise people when they come in, because there aren't good clinical trials on autoimmune disorders and a ketogenic diet? How do you advise them?
So, we're in a space that of grassroots change and grassroots assembling of information. And that's where there are anecdotes, there are credible anecdotes. I mean, if it's you or me, we'll believe it because it's us, right? That's a credible anecdote. If it's your patient and there are 10 of them and you know them and they're not lying, cheating, stealing,
right.
So they're credible anecdotes. I would say there's a strong credible anecdotal population of autoimmune disease getting reversed.
Yes.
Just that there's no clinical trial publication. A lot of doctors will say, see, it doesn't count because you don't have that kind of level of evidence. But so my understanding, and I think it's a good story and hangs in there, is that it all comes down to the leaky gut, where you're eating things that your gut is leaky and it lets proteins in that can cross-react to your body's protein, and the low carb or keto metabolism fixes it. The absence of those carbs that causes it is probably the key. So I have a poster on my wall when people come in and all the carbs are in this red box at the bottom. And I don't teach with the red box, but I show all these carbs and I'll just say, what do your doctors say causes the autoimmunity? What's causing the lupus? And they'll go, well, it's autoimmune. I said, well, autoimmune to what? What's causing it? And well, they don't know. They didn't know in the 1980s when I was in training. They don't know now. And so I look at this box of all the foods, and I'll say, I suspect it's something in this box.
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
I don't know what it is. I mean, it could be the carb, it could be the preservative, it could be the artificial dye, it could be all of these. To me, the mechanism never was so important to me, which may be why I'm pushing it back against the ketone measurements, maybe inappropriately or too hard. But autoimmunity, sure, there are a lot of anecdotes, but the problem with anecdotes is it doesn't tell you if you take 100 people in a row, what percentage of people will respond.
Right.
So if for example, some people can climb Mount Everest. Well, you can climb Mount Everest. Well, not everyone make it, right?
Some people die.
Are dead along the way. So anyway, we're not talking about Everest, but I'll just explain to someone that why wouldn't you try it? The doctors haven't told you. Well, now the doctors have really strong medicines that cut out all the symptoms of autoimmunity, but they're not without long-term problems, right? It kind of just covers up, masks these things, and people are already getting cancer as a result of the drug treatment of the autoimmune diseases. And this is true for psoriasis and skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
is it
pharma,
Is it the insulin that causes those autoimmunes? Boy, that is a connecting thread that it makes you very suspicious. But I think we can both be even a little more confident that it's probably something in the red box. And again, what you're doing there is saying, go to the lowest common denominator, and we can put threads that is going to increase your insulin. Is that the cause? I think that's a good theory. And when you're trying to help patients in real time, how do I, doctor, the one living right now before your clinical trial, how do I live my life? And I think that is where the art of medicine is. You can't.
Well, but why not be on the team or the group of people who are the research that we see in the meetings we go to? People are saying, actually, there's never been a study that showed this was bad.
Right.
We don't know why people say it's bad. I mean, we have innumerable anecdotes of vegetarian eaters who it wasn't the right match for their metabolism. It makes them sick. Mm-hmm. And so. But I don't know if it's the insulin, but again, my perspective is, if there's for example, if there's a dead body and a gun in a room, how did the person die? Was it the gun? Wait, was it the hole in the heart? Was it the bullet? Was it the person it never really mattered to me if the tree makes a sound in the forest if no one's there. I mean, just so you know, I need give me an experiment. Give me something that we can.
I love it. Okay, here's another question. So Casey Means, we both know who Casey Means, and her Good Energy book also works for Levels, or very part of runs Levels. And the patient writes in and says, where do the doctors land on the real-time tools, meaning continuous monitors, as discussed in that book? What's your opinion of those?
Yeah. Well, they can be extremely helpful. Mm-hmm. So the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors, now you don't even need a prescription to get one. That was kind of a limiting factor, but you do need money.
Yep.
You won't get one unless you have diabetes from most insurance companies. And then of course, ketone monitor or glucose monitoring itself is very helpful. The glucose watch one day will be out and people will be like, yeah, I can't eat that,
right.
And that's going to change everything.
Wouldn't that be great, right?
When it doesn't hurt to get your glucose reading. There was one that looked curious recently, but it was really the watch was hooked up to a CGM.
Oh, okay.
The technology isn't quite there, but and then the ketone measurements can be very helpful, but my point is that they're not required.
Right.
I guess I try to lower the barrier of the inertia. Usually that's hard to get people to get started. So I try to make it look easy, and it can be easy. But these other tools are extremely helpful.
Oh, and I think you hit on a really important point too. That is, what do I love about when I do that class where there's 3 weeks of intensity? Do I think they need to live their life like that? No. But when I think you pull back the curtain to see, here's what is happening inside your system. And it isn't such a revelation that your doctor knows what happens. It is that you can see, here's the behavior that leads to that. And they are totally something that you can measure and get that feedback, which hopefully is the change in behavior that leads you to not needing us anymore, which is the best plan.
Well, and I have to say, I kind of look to you, Dr. Boz, for the latest in tech. How are you wearing a ketone?
You know what? I had an experiment where all 3 of them were on. I had all 3 of the continuous glucose meters on, compared them. I will tell you, have you seen the new ones? Have you played with them yet?
No.
Well,
no, they're not on my radar yet.
Honestly, so I've worn a continuous ketone meter and a continuous glucose meter. Continuous ketone meters are not allowed in the United States yet, and I don't think they ever will be, based on some of the policy things that have happened in their coming.
Oh, no.
Yeah, honestly, they were not very accurate. As you would just look at continuous, it's a continuous subcutaneous fat is what you're measuring, just like you are with glucose. But that glucose has a lot quicker equilibration for the matching up. You know, the ones that are over the counter, I'm maybe I'm a snob, but you cannot calibrate them. So if you prick your finger and the glucose is 15 points off, 20 points off, which I had that happen more than once, you cannot reset it to match what your glucose is, unlike the ones that come with a prescription. And again, I think studying inaccurate data.
Okay. It's worse.
I was going to say, isn't it worse?
Yeah.
Because now you're falsely believing.
But what about just a reading that says low, high, or none, So I was chatting to someone who was in that glucose watch world, and they are able to measure glucose to a certain degree, but it's not good enough for insulin administration, so they're not approving it. And I'm like, well, we don't need it to be that good, right? We want, well, but maybe
I'll show you. Yeah. So here's what I learned. Here's like one of my summaries for that is, what do I see patients learn the most when they wear those devices? First things is I learn a lot by what your morning fasting numbers are. What do you do overnight when you take out the noise of all the stuff that can happen during the day? Give me that morning fasting data. And if you never take your morning fasting glucose into the double digits, you're always in the triple digits. Above 100, we have lots of work. We have work to do. So that number is important to me. That number needs to be accurate. And I found it off many times when I did the over-the-counter, couldn't calibrate. But the part that was accurate was when you eat something and you watch your blood sugar rise, how long did it take to go back down to baseline? And I think that also is an incredible, especially for me, where I'm like, I'm healthy. I fasted yesterday. I can have, and then I will do the I deserve moment, and I will overeat or something. And then to watch how long it takes my glucose to go down, that's a feedback for me that changes behavior. And I don't think I'm alone in that. So I do think what watches will show people is that excess consumption that comes with behavior and stress and that hedonic eating, where we say, I just want to escape the fact that a hurricane took out my home and I'm living out of my car. This is a true statement for me this week, where I'm like, forget it. The stress is enough. Here's how I'm coping. And I do think when patients have practiced this as their coping skill, and the amount of food they're eating is keeping their blood sugar up too long, too many minutes under the sun, that is a huge thing that a watch would be very good at having feedback for, and those over-the-counters are very good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's another question up here that I know we're about 10 minutes before we're done with the show, but and we can go as long as we want, but I think people do click off after a while. So there's There's two things I would like to ask you about. One of them is exogenous ketones and how you use them and if you recommend them. We'll start there, and then we're going to end with a tool that I think both of us are going to come find our space in, which is the GLP-1 drugs that are coming to the market. So let's start with exogenous ketones and let's go to GLP-1s.
Yeah, so exogenous ketones, the fact that you can raise a ketone level by drinking or eating or, maybe one day inhaling a ketone. So it's exogenous. It's not endogenous from within. Endogenous means your body fat is the fat's going to the liver. The liver is making the ketone endogenously. And that's the way that you can be in ketosis even without measuring it or taking ketones or fat. But the interesting thing about exogenous ketones is it's come a long way. 15 years ago, they tasted like, jet fuel.
Yes.
And the technology of making them palatable has really been great to see. The science, well, and then some of them are being sold without any science behind them,
Yep.
just on the perception and real or other, and it probably is real, but it cuts the hunger out. People feel well, but they are being sold without the due diligence and process of going through FDA drug approval, for example. So when you have a diet or is it a drug? I mean, if you're drinking it and it cuts your hunger out and it is curing cancer and fixes diabetes, is that not a drug? I mean, it's ketones themselves have a sort of strange place. Which we benefit from because doctors don't think diet matters. And here we're using a really strong keto diet, but without the exogenous ketones. But the exogenous ketone manufacturers don't want the oversight of a regulatory agency. So when I'm in a clinic dealing with people and diseases and risks and benefits of things, I haven't found the science yet to really support the use of exogenous ketones in my clinical world. In fact, I was talking to Dom D'Agostino, within the last 6 months, and I said, he has one now, a certain type, whether it's an ester or other types of formulations. And I said, well, who's studying this? He said, nobody. And I said, well, let's do a study and collaborate. We'll get real people and give it, it hasn't happened for many reasons, lack of money being the first one. So if the companies aren't going to do the studies to go through the equivalent of FDA approval for the clinical setting, we're really kind of left on our own to use them and to find the clinical sense of, are people getting side effects? Are they palatable? In my world, if someone has nausea the first week, they're either on metformin and it's now causing nausea, or they're adding oils, medium chain triglyceride, coconut oil, having butter in the coffee, or they're having a ketone supplement. It's not normal on my kind of low carb keto program to have nausea the first week. In fact, just about every gut problem gets better, which is we should really be gastroenterologists.
I know, we'd be out of business.
Except we wouldn't scope people, and that's why they do it. They get a lot of money from scoping people, but
yes, they do.
But so I don't know. I don't really use exogenous ketones yet. I have a few patients who are dallying here and there. There aren't strong anecdotal signals, at least in my world, of this one set of patients are trying to help their spouse with neurodegenerative disease and manipulating ketones. And these diseases are kind of hard to know if they're really getting better, but you can impact things, no question. And then because of the SGLT2 inhibitor, the idea that you can leak glucose in the urine and lower the blood sugar, which is not a good idea, but drugs do that.
Yep.
That actually develops ketosis, and these drugs, Jardiance and Invokana, have been found to reduce heart failure episodes, and now ketosis seems to be the mechanism. So there are researchers, even here at Duke, who are giving exogenous ketones for heart failure.
Wow, that's cool.
I'm like,
I mean, but
it was the drug side effect, because they only use drugs, and then exogenous ketones are being not a keto diet. So actually, I just met one of the lead investigators in those studies, and they're not easy to do. With heart failure patients, you're actually,
Yeah.
some of them have sophisticated measurements. And he doesn't really know much about a keto diet. He's giving exogenous ketones. So actually, there may be something to it. It's just that it's been very slow to get the studies done.
Well, and that's it, you first thing you start thinking about is to hypothesize why that would work. I mean, why would a ketone, a heart muscle is going to have a favorable idea, and that's a nice theory. Boy, I'd love to know the answer too. Right?
Well, the heart muscle runs on fat.
Oh, yeah.
Fat and ketones,
Right.
actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that it's built for that, right? Yeah. Like it should work, but should probably study it. So,
But so I don't know. I'm not using them in my practice yet.
in my practice, I have found one of my favorite ways to use the exogenous, because they are expensive. I have been a big proponent that if you're going to waste money on testing ketones, for heaven's sakes, spend it after you've spent money on some of these high dollar ketones. Because if you swallow the ketones and you do not find them in circulation, you're being sold a scam. And have I found that? Absolutely. There are products out there that say ketones on it. There are no ketones in there. It does not raise ketones. So prove 15 to 20 minutes later after you have that there are ketones. But the other place that I've found is probably more in the social realm, in that when people fall off the wagon, they have a carb binge, and now they're like, okay, I got to get back on track. I have said, you know what? Pushing reset can often be difficult. Timing matters. Sipping on ketones between here and the time you do that, whether that's 48 hours or whatever, to keep that appetite suppression. I've seen that be very powerful. Whether that's nausea or not, I don't know. But I do think the distance between the time you fall off the wagon and how you restart, I think shortening that by using a supplement in the meantime and saying, all right, push reset, get rid of those groceries, try again. Don't give up on this journey. So I found that to be a really.
And to your knowledge, there haven't been any reports of serious issues from the exogenous ketones.
Yeah, I think most of them are built with a salt, and so you can find people who, if they guzzled too much of them, they got diarrhea. But that's pretty quickly.
That's pretty minor, yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's
So, yeah.
good. Well, I think that's an area that is ripe for research.
Yeah, right.
And
Again, I'll take your money.
yeah.
Right. So let's end on something that I get a lot of folks asking about. I don't know if you've Googled recently how many GLP-1s are on the market in phase 2 or phase 3 trials, but I think the last Google search I did was 51 of them are under research right now. So they're not going anywhere. I was looking back to try and remember what was the first GLP-1 that we wrote. Byetta, was that the first one, or was that the second one? Anyway, they've been around.
I've never written.
Oh,
I've
really?
never written for that one.
Well, Byetta is a diabetes medication, probably 2013, 2014. And, it had this whisper of weight loss, and it was a bunch of samples. And so I started with the samples, and it was very interesting. And I think it does prove true as you watch forward that there were some people who just lost weight. Like it was some kind of magic fit that I'm like, great, I got like 15 pens. I don't know what to do with them. So you should have the samples. And they really did have a powerful weight loss. But it was hit and miss. It was very unpredictable. And I said, you can try it. If you have an appetite suppression, we'll write you the prescription, but they're very expensive. And so now as you look at the advent of several of them coming to the market, and of course what that brings is hopefully competition, lowering of the price and finding better resources. What's your framework for using what these drugs will do to not just the ketogenic world, but in the world of most of the patients who are looking to a ketogenic place do need to lose weight, and the weight loss part isn't subtle. It's very real.
Yeah, well, I also am past president of the Obesity Medicine Association, called OMA for short. AMA, OMA.
Okay.
In fact, I was on the team that helped change the name from the old one to the new one, and that's a thankless job, let me tell you.
Oh, you poor thing.
The old doctors were not happy, but anyway, they use a lot of medicines. Before it was phentermine, And still a lot of doctors are using phentermine or Adipex. It's like Adderall, and it cuts out the hunger. And I still use a little bit of that because it's cheap.
Yeah.
You know, it's or inexpensive. It's $20 to $30 a month. But so I even kind of joked that the organization were a bunch of phenterminers. They wrote phentermine, and it works for a period of time. But the GLP-1 drugs. I remember I was in a meeting that Novo Nordisk, the company in Denmark that is now, massively selling this stuff. They had a pipeline of all of the new medicines. This is 10 years ago, and it's come true. And there are the first generation ones. They're now second generation. They're going to be third generation, even beyond the mass number of the first generation that will be out there. But I have to imagine that there are maybe 10 hormones that are pivotal or really important, that if you target that hormone with a drug, it's going to, like, night and day, cut off the hunger, make people full. And the GLP-1 and then the GLP-1 combo, the Zepbound-Mounjaro, being the second generation. Okay, maybe there are 5 main ones. I don't know how many exactly. But yeah, for some people, it's like the food noise is gone, the weight comes down, and right after Oprah did her show saying she was giving up Weight Watchers and doing the drug shilling for the drug companies, basically, one of my patients came in and she said the food noise was gone. That's what happens on a keto diet. I said, yeah.
I know it.
I know. It's like, so a keto diet targets and hits all of these hormones.
Right,
I mean, it's as if the companies should be studying the keto diet to see which hormones are changed, and then target those hormones instead of, combining a Contrave as a pill that has bupropion and naltrexone, and it's the theory of hitting the brain. And I mean, why not target a method that really works?
Right.
But no one seems to want to know what really works. But anyway. I think if there's a vendor area of low carb, not low, of obesity treatments. Let's say you walk into the meeting and there's a bunch of vendors with booths. A lot of people in the past would come into this area through the surgery clinic.
Yep.
The surgeons would say the only thing that works is surgery. Nothing else works. And so they come in and then they see, well, wow, there's diet, there are a few drugs. Now a lot of people are coming into this vendor area of treatments through the shots, through the medicine. And so it's really important for everyone to know that other things have worked, other things have always worked, and there will be other things that work. And I think it's going to lower the bar for people to start at least addressing the obesity and the problem. But the tragedy, the way I see it, is doctors really don't know how to counsel people about the food. And if you don't hear the message that protein and fat and keto, which is a great diet to use when you're on one of these shots, if you don't hear that message, I have people coming in with just really terribly distorted eating, that they're losing muscle mass, they're even not feeling well. I mean, the people tolerate really bad gut issues. I remember back in the day, the drug company said, don't mess with the gut, because no one's going to take a drug that messes with the gut. And now 30% or so of people drop out. They can't tolerate these medicines because of the gut.
Right.
And yet they still brought the medicines to market because so many people are around that need it, But it's kind of giving weight loss a bad name, that you can do it in a way that doesn't give you nausea and makes you have no interest in anything, and so I don't know. I mean, what's your take? I think there's a lot of people will be helped. And then I hope they off-ramp onto a great eating program like ours.
Right. Well, so I'll tell you, when my life before a ketogenic approach landed in my internal medicine clinic was peak brain performance, and brain injuries, Parkinson's, bipolar, sleep disorders. I mean, they were internal medicine, but that was the thread that many of the patients were referred to me in my medical community. And I loved it. It was great. But what became a side part of that business was the addiction. So you had a brain injury, drink alcohol for 10 years, smoke marijuana, add meth. Those brain injuries were this major subtext to an internal medicine clinic. And you mentioned naltrexone was actually one of the levers that we would pull for a chronic alcoholic. I mean, taking away that dissociated behavior that the brain really does practice, and you become very good at it when you are abusing alcohol, opiates as well, but alcohol was such a higher incidence that it was our major, the major thing I learned through patient care. And so to watch that naltrexone, you could give them a shot. This is again a Vivitrol. It would last a month. It's $1,000. And yes, you could go to Betty Ford for $50,000 for the month, or you could spend $50,000 in an injection that would last you, 2 years at least, to get your brain to not crave for that alcohol. But what I learned, Dr. Westman, was that the addiction behavior for the alcohol, and when you could settle that noise, their ability to learn, how do you live life without booze? I mean, it was faster. I mean, as much as I didn't want, that's expensive, and they come in, and gosh, if a shot goes wrong, it's a huge hit to the, bottom line of the, all kinds of issues, right? But what I learned was when patients shut down the noise, you could get back to your life a lot faster. And when I look at folks who are, I want them to not need us. You can say that's bad for business, but I think that is the health of our country is got an obesity epidemic, and it comes with this a mental health issue that maybe it's cause or effect that's related to that obesity. I don't know, but it isn't shocking to me that when I look, the more you read about GLP-1, GIP drugs, the neuromodulation, they do not cross the blood-brain barrier, but they definitely affect the brain. And that some people having serious suicidal feelings and, haunted by, past demons of life that they thought they buried. I'm not surprised by that. And I do think that when I'm working with somebody and I'm trying to make sure they're in ketosis and check those numbers and do all the things, but they are stuck at a certain weight. And even with the best ketogenic diet, they go to support groups and they do all the things that you and I recommend. And then the weight continues to creep back until they address something. Something has hurt them, has broken them. And I mean, I think that is the addiction component to medicine that I do think that support groups are going to be the answer. I do think that you're going to need to have a, come to Jesus moment about how do you use food? Why is that coping skill the first, second, and third thing that you reach for? And how can we teach you to do something different? But what I hope happens with these medications, because I don't think they're going away, I do think that there'll be a tool in a toolbox that I would love to have on the bed of a ketogenic diet. And those who can't survive, can't seem to get the weight off. And I was reading a study the other day that it appears 50 pounds. I mean, even if you have them on they called it anti-inflammatory diet, where they'd lost weight, but they still have a 50-pound deficit for ideal body weight, that increased dementia, increased heart disease, increased risk of cancer, all these things that you and I see every day. Like if 50 pounds is what the cutoff is, there's a lot of people out there that'll be on these drugs if that's the parameters they're going to use. What I hope to happen is it's the smallest effective dose they can use. So in hopes that, like Vivitrol, they can get off of it. We don't know that.
So let me just echo the addiction part. And I learned a lot from Dr. Vera Tarman, who has a book called Food Junkies. Oh. She actually wrote a course for Adapt Your Life Academy, my teaching company. But I was on a study section, meaning we review grants that people wrote with a pharmacologist for several years in a row. And brilliant person, not an MD, but a PhD. And he said, show me a drug that's specific, and I'll show you a young drug. We just haven't learned everything about it yet. Because, a drug, we say it just targets this when it ends up targeting so many other things. And the addictive part of food is so common. We were all taught to use it for coping, and someone comes in, I say, what do you think causes the weight gain? And they write, emotional eating on the form, and I'm like, yeah, well, of course. I mean, I don't say that to somebody, but everyone everyone does. And the I forgot that you gave a lecture at Boca, the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, on the brain function. I
Yeah.
remember that study or that
Yeah.
presentation. Well, it's all connected. I'm actually the son of a shrink,
Oh,
so
really?
and that's one reason why a psychiatrist for you, the vernacular, and so I needed numbers. I needed something other than just the how do you feel, but
All
but I
comes full
do
circle.
have, but it's all connected. Yeah,
Yes.
well, there are more serotonin, they say, in the gut than in the brain. So
Hmm.
even a lot of these psychiatric medicines have effects all over, and yet how it's just amazing what changing the food can do. In the words of again, I was a part of an organization of doctors, 5,000 now, in the Obesity Medicine Association, and while not all of them used low carb or keto, we taught each other how to say things, how to measure the waistline, making people turn so I don't have to, anyway. And I'll just never forget that one of my friends came up with the idea that he practices the best internal medicine he's ever in his life, without drugs. We use food as medicine, good food, and what Rob Lustig says is at University of California, San Francisco, good food is medicine, but bad food requires medicine.
Amen.
So it wouldn't surprise me in the questions tonight that autoimmunity is caused by all of these carbs in some way, while the mechanism isn't quite known. It's something in that red box, because so many things get better, and then the advent of people who are not eating any plants, the so-called carnivore movement is fixing people that the doctors can't fix.
Right.
And I'm just kind of watching this
All
play out with stories. It's really pretty amazing. As you said, it's so gratifying if you came into being a doctor to help people and to solve problems. What a tool we have.
Amen. Oh, honestly, it's been great. I think the next time you and I overlap in person might be low carb Boca. Are you going to that? Right? Do
Yeah,
you have
I'll
a
be there.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're like one of the founders and like one of the godfathers of these, continued
Well, I'm on the board.
Right. I knew that. I
I'm
wasn't
on.
sure if it was still on the board or if those are seasonal things you rotate off of. So do you give a lecture this year?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'll talk about. My interest, though, is kind of what running on fat can do, because McArdle disease, for example, a
Oh,
very rare orphan disease, is fixed.
that's
And yet the mainstream world would rather do research with genetic companies to try to go in and fix the gene than to tell someone just change the food.
food, right? Oh, it's
So
brilliant. That's a
and
great, first of all, that's a great, like when I'm trying to talk to somebody who's, the analytical, I don't believe in keto, it's McArdle's, or I'll say, look at this. I mean, so I just actually said yes to speaking at Low Carb Boca this year, and I'm doing menopause brain because they're doing a day on women's health. So I think we'll get to talk. I think uric acid is what I'm doing the next day, but at least menopause brain for how that might be helpful for folks coming.
Right.
So again, one of the few places we get to go for continued medical education in this space that I do think has probably the best value and return of joy for our service to patients. So, well, thanks again. Thanks for duking it out. I think we kept it respectable.
I'll get the food fight.
Yeah, right. Well, you are a blessing to the space, and I will say good night to our viewers. We obviously won't be going live tomorrow, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Dr. Westman.